I think it's slowed down a little bit, so I'm going to get this show rolling. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to this webinar brought to you by NWHeat. We are a collaboration between the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium and the Orbis Cascade Alliance of Academic Libraries. And our goal is to advance our common purpose to ensure that systems, services, and resources are equitably available to our users and on our campuses. So today's webinar, the first of our fall season, is on library building accessibility assessment with Andy Andrews, the Assistant Director of Academic Services for the Disability Resources for Students Office, and Hana Levay, Collection Assessment Librarian, both at the University of Washington. I have a few housekeeping items before we turn things over to Andy and Hannah. First, please keep your mics turned off, but cameras are optional. Second, you can use the link provided in the chat to go to the event webpage if you want to access the slides directly. We will address questions at the end, and you can put them in the chat. Captioning is available if you would like. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website and our brand new YouTube channel. Depending on what version of Zoom that you have, you might be offered links to Zoom's new AI features. That seems to be a function of your client version. And we have not activated any AI features for this meeting. And lastly, there will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar to get your feedback. And please do take a moment to fill it out when we're done. So that is it. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy and Hannah.
All right. Thanks for that, Miriam. Yeah, so as she said, I am Andy Andrews. I actually started at the libraries about 2 months before Hannah came to their role. As the accessibility coordinator. So this stuff is really work that we did in collaboration with our accessibility working group within the libraries. And then the DRS stole me. They made me offer I couldn't refuse. But yeah, so a little bit of introduction is one of the things that, libraries, I think something I realized early on when I started at UW Libraries is that there's a lot of pride in making sure patrons have access to, all kinds of information. My role there was actually created in response to the electronic resources and ensuring accessibility. But one of the things that also needed to be looked at was our physical spaces, and the working group was a way for me to do that within my role, but outside of my role, right? Because that's the thing we hear a lot from folks is that, like the buildings are old, like how do we get into them? Because there's no elevator or there is an elevator and it's kind of scary, or all of these different kinds of things. And it's hard to change architecture, right? Like we know that new buildings have to meet ADA requirements as they go. A lot of our older buildings, and that's something we see at UW a lot because it's, a several 100-year-old campus, that we just have some buildings where we can't change architecture. And so that was something that was proposed to the group, was trying to figure out how that's done. And we so we're going to kind of a little talk about how can you all I guess identify barriers within your own libraries. I guess next slide. Yeah. So motivation. Yeah. So we started again with web pages. It was something that we reached out to the ADA coordinator of our our university and said, hey, like, what are some stuff that we could do to help folks? And it was that we look at trip planning, right? So when a student is thinking of going to the art library, like things that they need to know about getting into that building. So that if there's any access barriers into the art building, that they can actually get that before, so they would plan their trip. They're like, oh, I can't get into the art building with it's during certain hours because the, you know, like our art building is like a staircase up to the first floor, and then it's got one of those wheelchair things that goes down and around the staircase. And so that was something where a lot of power chair users are like, no way am I going to get on that thing, because there's no way to guarantee that the weight of my chair and that thing cooperate. So it's just some things for us to think about. And yeah, next slide. So this is kind of what we came up with. We started out with, we took our committee and we had people just kind of go out there and be like, hey, just let's start looking at some barriers. We got information, some documents of kind of how to help us hone that. But we just started looking at simple things like the entrance, the bathrooms, and start accessing those barriers. And stuff we'd already had was the assistive technology. So it's kind of also, we want to put that like some of the good things. So it's not all like here, like talking about we have ramps and door paddles, right? But barrier is narrow spaces in some stacks, bathroom signage, right? That kind of stuff, so that people know what to expect when they get there. And we did this for each of the branch locations. What was, I think the document that did we talk about that in the slide, was given to us to start with, was actually for prison systems, for those Washington State prison systems, because prison systems have to be the most accessible buildings ever because of the population, which is a huge document. And so we really whittled that down to our points of service. And that's kind of what we came up here with, like entrances, bathrooms, check out where they're checking out and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So after we did that brief assessment, yeah, we did a much more in-depth one. And then we had to look at, like, are these problems really barriers? Which ones can we remediate? And if there's a short-term fix, or if it's going to require longer-term planning. And longer-term planning is more like, it's going to take some money, right? Short-term fixes might be like, we move some trash cans because they're blocking the aisle, and we can move them to keep that aisle width at like 36 inches, I believe it is. And I talked about this a little bit before we started out looking at some different things. So we looked at the Northwest ADA Center's accessibility checklist, sorry, based on the 2010 ADA standards. We then had some folks convert that into a spreadsheet, and we do have templates for all this stuff. So if you want it for your own stuff, again, added remove sections that only apply to library spaces, because there's just, you know, we don't need to think about a lot of stuff that are within the prison system. Created a document to help you all. So if you take this back to your libraries, you'll have a template to kind of help guide you through it, doing a walkthrough. We did consult with library users who have disabilities. At that point, we consulted with folks through the DRS. So if you have a service office on your campus, which you should, they can be a good partner in connecting you with folks that might want to express their opinions about what we need to look at. Next slide. And as you can imagine, looking at how many 100-page document for the prison system, we were overwhelmed, which is why what we have to deliver to you all is pared down, because we were overwhelmed and didn't know where to start. Again, that's working with our ADA coordinator, partnering with the ADA coordinator was, I think, really instrumental in helping us. Our very initial walkthrough we did was with the ADA coordinator. We do that on a Saturday or something. I feel like we did it on a weekend or something because no one's schedule would work out. But we all just came in, found some time, to work with the ADA coordinator, who's also our section 50, so ADA and section 504. So really has to know all of these things about 32 inches here, 36 inches here, like all the different measurements, and was really able to help us hone in those basic principles for wheelchair mobility, blind, low vision, using a cane to navigate. And this is some examples of some stuff. So wheelchair use is operable parts, as you see in the diagram, is unobstructed between 15 inches and 48 inches, or the upper end of things that kind of come out from the wall that we're making sure that they're at certain spots, like no lower than this spot for cane, and then the up high is more so like something in the wheelchair and it's not in this like head range. Okay. And another example is like clearance. So you're looking at your tables, where then some study spaces, making sure, like I think we went to the art library. They had as many chairs crammed around the tables as possible, which made it hard to navigate for anyone in general, but it also made it impossible to navigate with wheelchair use. And countertops, I think the thing we had is we had computer stations that were dedicated for student use that were all at the right ADA access level, but all the public patrons were on much higher shelf, like so bar height, which meant any public patron with a disability couldn't use the computers to do any of their research. And so as suggestions we can make like that, like let's make sure we have at least one public patron if we can't lower them all. And so for blind, low vision mobility, again, we looked at that clearance. So the area of a cane detection. So it's 27 inches max. And then again, we've got those height for stuff like handrails, protrusions. So your fire extinguishers, right? That's going to be some of that stuff is do you have flush ones, or do you still have ones that are like the extinguisher is just mounted on the wall versus a case that goes into the wall? And I think when we did the art library, we found out that our fire extinguishers were in the no-go zone. Go ahead and tools. We found Hannah found a really great tool, is a yardstick, right? So, because a lot of stuff fits into that 32, 36 inch range. So yardstick is great. And we threw some duct tape on the end of it. And for our measurements for, I think for the 42 and the 48, and so all those different measurements. So we had a really cheap, effective way to do that. Some other things that were great to have is a carpenter level, fish scale or door pressure gauge, so that you can, that's when you're checking the door for pressure to make sure it's that right amount of pressure to open the door. A general use door is different than a fire door. So a fire door can have a much higher pressure because of fire safety. Cameras to document the stuff, because if you're producing a report, we did produce a report to send to our associate deans, the ones that can actually get the money to make the changes. So taking those photographs to document stuff. And we had a timer. And I think that was to check the close rate of the door to make sure, I think it's like 5 seconds. So making sure it's a minimum of 5 seconds for an automatic door to close, because that's something your facilities people can just come out and tweak. Next slide.
Okay, this is my turn. So thanks, Andy. Andy gave a great overview of why we're doing this and the general guidelines that are guiding this process. And I wanted to talk about specifically what we did step by step. So because I know it's very overwhelming to think about doing this at your own location. So just having a little show and tell might help you be more comfortable doing this. So, and I've got some pictures. So this is the very front door of the building where I am sitting right now. We have a paddle button to push that'll automatically open the door. You can see a picture of my fancy yardstick tool. And And I've measured the door there, and it's more than 32 inches wide, which is what it needs to be. So that's great. There needs to be a clear path leading to the door, which is obviously plenty of room there. And then we mentioned the reasonable amount of force. It's not actually defined in the ADA. And this is an exterior door, a fire door. So in Washington state, that is defined to be 10 pounds. Other states might have different numbers or not, depends on your local rules. And then, yeah, 5 seconds to close. That automatic door paddle opens the door and it needs to wait 5 seconds before it closes. The door hardware must not require twisting or a tight grip. So those round doorknobs aren't great. And then we want the door hardware to be between 34 and 48 inches off the ground. And that is related to the reach zones that we were referring to earlier. The doorway, yeah, has to be at least 32 inches wide. And then if there's a vestibule, so like an area between two sets of doors, there's some more rules, but I did not get into that here because it's just more information than most people probably need, but it is in the documentation. If you have a vestibule, you can see that. So once you get into the front door, the next thing you need to do is figure out the path that a user would need to take to get to all of the goods and services in your building. So depending on what your building is about, like in libraries, there's a circulation desk, there's study rooms. If you have some other kind of building, like some of us have coffee shops or vending machines or bathrooms, various things that people need to do in your building. You need to make sure that there's a path to each one of those things that is accessible, and then we'll define that next. So the main idea is that the path needs to be at least 36 inches wide, and that's where my yardstick comes in handy because I can just walk down the path with my yardstick, and if I can fit through, then I know that it's at least 36 inches wide. There are some other rules. If the path is a certain length, you need to have a wider area in case there needs to be a passing zone, but that is in the documentation. So then what you need to check, like a very basic thing we found often was that there was just a trash can in the path. And you just don't know that unless you're doing a walkthrough. So in that case, we saw the trash can, very easy to just move it somewhere else and boom, you've got an accessible path. Make sure you have options besides staircases, so ramps or elevators. Check the slope of the ramp. It needs to be 1 out of 12. I'm not sure how to say slopes. 1 to 12 at the maximum. And again, the operable parts of any of your services must be no higher than 48 inches, and there needs to be an approach path to the operable parts. And here I have a picture of a counter example that we found that was not great because you need to be able to push the buttons in the middle of that Husky card to add value station. But there was a printer in front of the add value station, so it was not reachable by someone using a wheelchair. In this case, we were actually decommissioning these machines, so we did not have to worry about that, but a solution would be to move the printer in this case, which is not hard to do. And then also check for protrusions. I have another counter example here. This fire extinguisher box is sticking out. It is more than 27 inches off the floor, so a cane would not be able to identify that protrusion, which would be dangerous for someone who can't see. They would walk right into that. So, and it is protruding more than 4 inches away from the wall. So ideally we would move this fire box. That's a bigger job, obviously, than moving a trash can, but like not impossible. A major problem that we had in the libraries is that our stacks are too narrow. We want the path to be 36 inches wide, and ideally the books would also be located in the reachable range of 15 to 48 inches, and we just have way too many books to make any of that happen. Remediating this problem would require a huge weeding project and or purchasing more space, both of which are very difficult. So we do have a workaround, which is that people can request an item to be delivered to any of our circulation desks at any branch. And we can do that very quickly. So we consider that an acceptable alternative. We also have placed signs informing patrons that they can go ask a staff member for help right away. So anytime that the libraries are open, we do have people at the circulation desks who can help with that. Bathrooms have a lot of rules. It's going to be hard to outline them all right now. They're in the documentation, but the key details are the doors wide enough to get through that 32 inches. So that's the door to the bathroom and the bathroom stalls doors. And is there a 36-inch path to the accessible toilet stall? If it's multiple stalls, you want one stall at least to be accessible. I have another slide for bathrooms. Is there room to turn around in a wheelchair, which I believe I have it written down somewhere else, but it's 60-inch diameter circle to turn around. You want to make sure that the sink, soap dispensers, towel dispensers are reachable. In this case, we've got the paper towel perhaps being blocked by the trash can. Let's see, toilet seat is at the correct height. It is hard to remediate bathrooms. That's a bigger project, but again, if it's something like a trash can or replacing the paper towel roll, something like that, those would be not too hard to do. Water fountains, I have a diagram here, but basically the hardware needs to be at most 36 inches high and not require excessive force. And there should be room underneath the water fountain so that a wheelchair user can get under there. Elevators, again, are very difficult to remediate elevators, if not impossible. But your key details here are you want the doorway to be at least 36 inches wide. And there's various combinations of interior dimensions, but basically you want there to be able to turn around the 60-inch diameter. And again, if the elevator is not accessible, there should be signage. I mean, you can't fix the elevator, so you at least place signage to direct users to alternate access or information about how to do what they need to do. And buttons, need to be at most 48 inches. Again, the door timer, that 5 seconds to close, with the additional rule of being fully open for 3 seconds. There needs to be visible and audible indicators on the inside and the outside, and then raised characters and braille floor indicator in the jamb. So you can barely see this in the picture. There's a little, on the interior jamb, there's a braille sign saying which floor it is. And all of our buttons have braille on them. So this is a good elevator. I didn't take a picture of our bad elevator, but I did find an elevator that is not accessible in one of our branches. Which was actually good in that case because the floors it could travel to were also not accessible. So it wouldn't have helped to travel up there. Anyways. Circulation desk, and this is any kind of desk that you might have in your building where there's customer service happening. There needs to be at least a section of it, 36 inches long, that is 36 inches high. So in this picture, there is a 36-inch high section, but it is not 30. Well, actually, I can't remember if that one was 36 inches wide, but I would measure that just to make sure. And then make sure there's an approach 30 inches wide and 48 inches long in front or parallel to approach that area. And if you need to ring a bell to get service, you make sure there's a bell down on the lower section so that those users can use the bell. And if that area is not obvious, make sure to put a sign there. There was another note I wanted to mention somewhere along the way, but sometimes these accessible portions of the counter can become storage inadvertently. We saw some areas that it's a nice little area of the desk, but it had a printer and some piles of paper. Just because people don't use it that often, they think they can just place items there. So that's something to watch out for. Another important thing to check is your interior rooms. So at the library, we have study areas, lots of study areas, study rooms. So we went through and checked them. The rule is that only 10% of your areas need to be accessible. So if we found some that were not accessible, that was okay. I mean, ideally, we would like everything to be accessible, but that's not always possible. And this is a counterexample. Behind that stained glass window is our beautiful Suzzalo reading room. It's a tourist attraction, to be honest. People come and look at it. They call it the Harry Potter room, or they used to. I don't know if they still do. But you can't go in there with a wheelchair because the doorways are not 32 inches wide. So that is unfortunate. And I'm not sure how we can ever fix that. Then inside the study area, you want to make sure there's a clear 36-inch wide path within the study room itself to get to anything that might be in there, like a computer, or projector, or whiteboard. Checking the computer stations, we want at least 10% of our computer stations to be modular furniture. So adjustable height desk and wheels on casters, chairs on casters. We want powered adjustable height, just because the hand crank ones can be too much force required to do that. And then we also want accessible technology installed on the shared computers. It's also important to provide laptop stations for anybody that has their own personal software they need to use, so they can bring their laptops. Printing and scanning stations, just like the computer stations, we want to make sure that they are on adjustable height tables. The controls need to be no higher than 36 inches. Then for safety, we want to check fire alarms and areas of refuge. I tried to take a picture of a negative, which is hard. We want to have a visual strobe alarm that's visible from all areas of the building. So in this case, I would hope to be able to see one of those fire things on the ceiling here, but in this area of the library, I could not see one anywhere nearby. So I would hope that next time we do a fire alarm check, we can see about installing more. Also, you can install them on the walls, and that would make the strobe light can travel further along the wall. And you want the visual alarm in addition to the audio alarm for in case of deaf users. And then you need areas of refuge on each floor if you're above the ground level. And then signs indicating the nearest area of refuge. And those signs are placed at the elevators and emergency exits. So here's a picture. This is our elevator. There's a sign for the area of refuge, the public stair 17 over there. Raised characters and braille signage on those signs, and also on, I see I'm talking about signage now in general, but so we want those on any kind of directional signs, and especially bathroom signs. And for the braille, you want to make sure nothing is blocking the floor area in front of those signs, and the tactile area of the sign should be between 48 and 60 inches. And make sure that the raised characters and braille is available at the elevator. You want signage to have good contrast and font size appropriate for the viewing distance, and this is not defined. So there's some guesswork there. Again, the informational sign at circulation desk pointing to the accessible area if it's not obvious, and then informational signs at the inaccessible stacks in our case, anywhere where it's not an accessible area, but someone might need to get in there, you should have some kind of signage directing them to an alternate solution. Other things you could consider, but we did not, because we were focused on interior spaces, but it's very important to consider the parking lot, the exterior approach to the building, so any kind of ramps leading to the front doors. If you have food service, there's a whole additional list of things you could check, which we didn't do that for ours, but it is important. And dining areas. And you might want to also look at the route from your closest accessible bus or shuttle stop. So at University of Washington, we have a campus map that shows where all the accessible bus, well, there's a shuttle that can take people around, and it shows all those stops. And then people can plan their route from the stops to your accessible entrance. Okay, so after you do all that work, and I did enjoy doing that work, roaming around with my fancy ruler. Usually you need to take 2 people because one person will measure and the other person will take notes. It's hard to do both by yourself. And then we created a template so that we wouldn't really lose track of what we're trying to communicate, because there is a lot of information. So on this template, I don't know if you can read it, but the link goes to the copy of it you can look at. There's like an introductory part that is the same for all of them. And then the summary has the major barriers found at this location, and then like some examples of common barriers. So the person filling out this report could just delete the ones that aren't appropriate. So that's pretty easy. It is pretty customized to our libraries, but if you were going to be doing this work a lot, you could, make your own version of common barriers you're finding. And then, so there's a summary, and then on the next page, which I don't have a picture of, but there's some more very specific findings. And it's important to clearly call out the major barriers. These are the things that they're obvious, and they're either easy to fix or should definitely be posted on our website as a barrier and kept in mind for any kind of future renovation projects. The other thing, you need to consider who to send the reports to. In our case, we had people managing the buildings as well as people managing the library in the building. It's kind of complicated, but all of those people needed to be informed about these, as well as our deans of the library. Yeah, I talk about that here. Actually, Andy, I think that you are supposed to take over at this point.
Right. Yeah, so who do you communicate all of your hard work to, right? So we have a lot of stakeholders here at the UW. So library leadership, again, the deans, branch managers, but also UW libraries is in 13 libraries, which means we are the tenant in other departments' buildings a lot of times. The math library is in the math department, right? The drama library is in the drama department's building. So there are times where we don't have control over some of this stuff because we're the tenant. And so then that's when we have to bring in the building. I think we have building managers, they're like building coordinators, right? But those are the people within facilities that need to know about some of these issues. And looking at, people who are just there every day. So whether it's leadership, they work on those long range plans, figuring out how funding is going to happen to address some of those more costly fixes. Branch managers and the staff, because those are the ones that are going to make sure the trash cans aren't in the aisle, because custodians get them off to the side where they belong. Your patrons come in, and what do? They move things out in the way, and then they've created a barrier without even realizing that they're doing it. And so that's like really checking for those block paths, and just helping with your desk staff to have a better awareness about various accommodations that you offer. So like that we have the book delivery service to any branch, like any circulation desk. And that's actually a really, I think, popular service with a lot of our patrons, right? Like it addressed the need of those with disabilities, but then you've got somebody who's over in our med student over in the meds, and they might need something clear across campus, and time-wise, it's just easier for them to have it delivered to the medical library versus them coming over to Suslo, right? Because that's 45 minutes of their day that they've saved. So it is one of the one of those universal, like we think about universal design. That's one of those things that really has a big impact on your users, not just those with disabilities. And then sharing that information, right? Like if we're finding that we have. Sometimes your patrons don't know where the accessible entrance is, the most accessible path. Like our undergraduate library, Odegaard, there's like all of these stairs that lead up to Odegaard. And so we will frequently hear how the main entrance to Odegaard isn't accessible because they have to go up these big steps. But like right next to the big steps is our entrance from our parking garage, which brings them straight into an elevator that actually brings them up. And so saying from the street, like from Stevens Way, where so our street level is the most accessible actual, that gets you to the main entrance. So helping them understand that where those points are will all not only make their experience better, I think in the long run, then they're not just thinking that your university doesn't care about them, right? Like it's by putting that out there, it shows that you actually care and that their experience matters. And again, with you all, so other institutions, right? And then future ideas is when you can, go beyond the ADA requirements. Welcoming and comfortable spaces. So that really comes to just like how you set up your spaces. I'm thinking of like one of the things that we've done is the signage about noise levels. Like we put up signs that say like, this is a very collaborative space, right? And this space is more of a quiet area. That isn't just great for like me as an individual when I come to study, like, or if I need to meet with a group, but maybe as someone who comes in where I just get really overwhelmed by loud auditory stuff. If I come here and I already know that this is a loud space, I can select, and then there's signs that tells me where the quieter spaces are. That allows me as an individual to make the best choices for myself, and not feel like I'm just now in this cacophony of noises, right? And I'm stuck studying there. So again, like the sensory accommodations, lighting. This is something we struggle with here at the UW, is that all the lights are on, right? One system, you flip the switch and they all go. And so identifying maybe some study spaces where you can have an actual light switch so they could turn the light off if possible, and identifying those spaces for folks. So if you have ones that are on their own switch, that can be really helpful to put in, like your room reservation system for study spaces. Like this one has an individual light switch, or this one's on a dimmer. Like those kinds of communications can really help. All right, yes. Yeah, lessons learned. I think we learned a lot. Honestly, we really learned a lot. Not just consulting with people with disabilities that identify as a disabled individual, but and it's something that I think I brought to the table, is that as the accessibility coordinator, I constantly tell people, you don't need to be an expert, you don't need to be a specialist, right? You can start anywhere. And it was something that I used a lot in just my practice as the coordinator, is like, well, what are you doing already that you don't even realize in your work to improve accessibility? And then how can you build off of that? And I think that made it also easy within our working group to people like, oh, I did learn how to make my emails more accessible. I could go and do this project because, Hana, and I think Jewel was one of our partners, and like they gave us this great template, and I feel empowered to go out and do this. And be part of the process for the change. I think that when you have having committees that can do that, and just getting people involved, that as long as they are excited about it, anyone can do it. And then also it's really helpful to have barriers identified, even if there's no funding fix now. Not only is it helping with trip planning, but future planning for reports. One thing I think Hannah didn't mention, but like right at the time we concluded our report for one of our libraries, which we won't name at this point, but they were just about to, they'd just gotten a big grant for remodeling from a donor. And so they had already identified some of the stuff. So when they met with the architect, who should be an expert on ADA stuff, right? But when they met with them, they already were feeling prepared. The director of that library felt prepared to have conversations with the architect, so that when the architect was talking about things that needed to happen, that director now had a real good understanding going into that conversation. So we really helped equip that director for those conversations. And then, yeah, you'll have to track changes and reassess over time, because hopefully, you make improvements, but there's always the thing is, I actually got my degree in the School of Architecture and Planning, and you do all the things to make the building perfect, and then you let the occupants in and they just muck everything up. Right? Because they have their own ideas how the space should work. And so it is like you have to reassess that, see how your different departments are, right? Because you're reprogramming spaces all the time. And so you need to check on that and see how that's affected things. I think we're done, which means we can have questions.
I think we do have a couple of questions that came through chat. While we're on the lessons learned, there was the question, did you consult with your campus facilities services, the physical plant design team?
Well, I was just going to say that we involved our library facilities, but we did not talk directly with UW facilities. It's very complicated here. But I think that our UW library facilities people did reach out to the larger facilities when it was appropriate.
Okay.
And I would add that, so because of some of our branches, so we have Tacoma and Bothell, which are not on main campus. That was a situation where we did have to work directly with their facilities, because they don't, UW Libraries is lucky that we have our own in-house facilities folks, right? That helped us with a lot of things. But Tacoma and Bothell have to work with just the campus facilities. So we did have to consult with them, because there were some recommendations we were going to make that they didn't like. And so we did have to work with them and figure out through conversation why they didn't like it and how do we readdress it, and figure out, is there, for example, the adjustable height desks. They were like, oh, we can't have adjustable height desks on the same outlets with computers, which doesn't make sense, because adjustable height desks are a workstation, which means they're plugged into a wall with a computer. And really what the concern was of overloading the circuits. That was actually the root concern. And so through that consultation, we were able to find, okay, you're actually concerned about, okay, so now we can reapproach that, and instead of having a bank of accessible desks, powered height desks, we can move them around the floor so that they're dispersed better, so that we're not taxing the fuses, right? The circuits.
I had an anecdote I just heard today, actually. Speaking of facilities, so and users mucking with things. In one of our branches, we had several study areas, and the lights were always on. And the librarian at that branch found that sometimes the users would unscrew the light bulbs in those rooms to make it dark, because it was too bright, and they're trying to make these adjustments themselves. So anyway, so they reached out to the larger facilities, and they were able to come and change up all the lighting in those rooms. So now there's a switch. So it was a nice collaboration between users showing their needs, local library manager, and then the larger facilities all working together to fix that. And that's a universal design thing, not just a disability thing, but I thought that was a pretty interesting. People actually unscrewing light bulbs.
We have another question for you. During the time that you spoke about the circulation desk, to be able to create part of that desk that was accessible, there was reference to the width and the height. And the question was, is there a depth requirement?
That is a good question. So you're thinking from the edge of the desk to where the staff would be standing?
I think that's what Lucinda had in mind.
Yeah, I don't remember there being a measurement for that.
Yes, I'm thinking because when people are coming up and checking out materials, they want to be able to set stuff on the counter when they have, if it's, 12 inches, that could maybe be a problem.
It's an excellent point. There might be a measurement in the documentation, but I did not remember that. So yeah, we have links to the full reports that are from the Northwest ADA Center, and the ADA itself have all of those numbers that are, if you want to get down to it. That's a good point. I might guess 36 inches just because everything else is 36 inches. I don't know. I do know that the depth in a different situation is 17 inches. Let me get the wheelchair clearance slide. On this one, it mentions 17 inches of clearance, but that's for their feet, so I'm not sure that actually applies. Yeah, I don't know.
It may not be clearly defined.
I don't know.
And then Lucinda, would you want to follow on with the question you post most recently in the chat?
Yeah, sorry, I have tons of questions because I work with spaces. So I'm thinking about those open study areas, where we have lots of tables out and whatnot, and the requirement that we want 10% of that area be accessible. But if you have a table with 4 chairs, a wheelchair can't just roll up there, right? So did your group have any thoughts on that? Did you address that? Because at computer stations, we typically have chairs that have casters on them, so they're pretty easy to roll aside, but not necessarily at tables, and those, at least not in the libraries I've seen. So do you remove chairs? Do you, I don't know. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Don't we have a mix? There's quite a few chairs that are on casters. And specifically, you're looking at 5-point chairs, right? So you want that 5-point caster. I think there might still be some rogue 4-point chairs out there if you've got really old chairs, which is possible. But I think in some of the areas, what we did is, even though 4 chairs fit at a table, I'm thinking Hana, the ones up by the entrance to Suzzalo, is that we put 3 chairs at every table. Right, so that way there's always is a wheelchair, because they're going to move the chairs around. If so they need 4, they're just going to pull a chair from another table and they're going to do it. But it was one of the things we did. We when they reconfigured some spaces, they might do 3 chairs instead of 4, because I think we had like way too many chairs, and so they were actually kind of weeding out some of the older furniture. It was like, okay, this table fits 4 people, but you got 6 chairs at it. So if you're going to get rid of 2, maybe you get rid of 3, right? Since some of the locations were actually looking at ways to make it look more inviting and welcoming anyway. It made it easy to make those recommendations of like, how many do you really need at a table, instead of
Okay. Yeah, no, that helps a lot, because all of our chairs are wooden at all our study tables. And so, and yes, the furniture moves, the students, they take them all over the place. So there are oftentimes tables that are missing chairs, but if those chairs get moved to another table and you haven't pulled some extra chairs, you still end up with path blockage, because they put 6 or 8 chairs around a table, right, and they stick out. So thank you. That's helpful.
And that's just a thing I think you can kind of educate staff on when they're doing their walkthroughs. If they see like an empty table that's got all the chairs, that maybe the chair next to it, the table next to it's got none, to maybe, because it does require everyone's participation, right? In ensuring that. I worked in the DRS office, and we still have to combat it all the time too. Like, because we have students, they come in here and they're waiting for their exams, and they just move furniture around to do what they need for that space. And now they have created an issue, and then so our staff has to then go and put it back where it belongs. Like, it's just humans are going to use what they want when they need it, and then when they don't need it, they forget about it. And
right,
so,
but that reducing the number to begin with would have an impact too. So.
And we have switched to, a lot of chairs with casters instead when we can, when we're doing an upgrade or something. And then 10%, we have some areas that just, the whole area is kind of just not very accessible. But since we have lots of other areas that are accessible, it kind of balances out. So it's not that you need 10% of every room and every table necessarily to be accessible. Sure. Yeah.
And I would say we're fortunate at the UW is that we were able to address the replacing the tables with the power adjustable height tables, which actually don't cost any more than tables that don't have power. Furniture is always expensive. It's like $1,000 with one with power and $1,000 for one without power. I haven't quite figured that out, but that we have a student technology fee fund. And so because of that, the technology sitting on the heavy oak desk that doesn't move was paid for with student technology fee funds. And so they were like, yes, you can use fee funds to then support desks that have power that are adjustable because it's supporting technology we've already provided. And our student government is very invested in accessibility for their classmates and stuff like that. So we're kind of, I think we're fortunate in that. And so it was one way that we could deal with that financial shift, is that we're looking to replace some technology, right? Because furniture typically is not something that can be used for technology fees, but if it's powered and it's supporting, the scanner that they've paid for, right? Or workstations, or even if we're creating laptop stations and they've paid for the monitors on that station, like there's ways to like look at that and how can you get some external funding to address some of those issues when, typically I think you don't get new furniture except for when you're doing a major remodel, right?
I think we have one more question. Did you learn anything unexpected when consulting with disabled users?
I have some notes. I'm trying to find the right slide. Here we go. I can just read the notes that we have, although Andy, I think, can speak to it. Okay. So things we've heard from disabled library users, limited use of hands. If they have limited hand use, it means certain door hardware is impossible to use, such as a doorknob. They've also said getting no or inaccurate information from public websites about the accessibility of a space, and then being unpleasantly surprised upon arrival. And they don't necessarily want to have to call every time they want to go somewhere, just to plan. And they really need to know if there isn't an accessible bathroom so they can plan ahead. Sometimes spaces are usable but feel really unfriendly, like trying to check books out at a standing height counter while sitting in a wheelchair. And then encountering a ramp that is too hard to use when you're in a manual wheelchair. So those are some comments we've gotten.
And I would probably add that nothing surprises me. So, because prior to working at the library as a coordinator, I worked in actually the remediation of inaccessible classroom materials. And so I worked in an office similar to the DRS at a previous institution. And so nothing ever surprises me. I think if you go into this with a universal design mindset, it will really help the way you can address issues. But there's just going to be always something, because everyone's an individual, right? Like there might be something that universally that's understood is like, if you design this way, right, or you make your web page like this, that for 99% of blind users, this will be effective. And there'll be the 1% that actually wants it, in a way that's counter to what you've ever been taught, right? And so I know that going in because of my previous experience that individuals are individuals and they're still going to have personal preferences. And something we have to think about in accommodations is like, is the barrier removed or is this because of a personal preference? And so if we want to think about it, is like, are we removing the barrier for the masses? For as many people as possible, right? Like, has the barrier been removed? Because we all have our preferences, right? Like, I mean, yeah, I would prefer that the airplanes didn't fly over my house so loud, but but I don't know.
Thank you for that. Thank you, especially to Andy and Hannah for your presentation. And I also want to thank our live captioner who's here with us today. I know we really appreciate having good captions. Please take a moment if you can to complete our survey. I just put the link into the chat. We really do use the feedback that we get to think about planning our upcoming webinars. And then also, we do already have our next one scheduled. It's on November 16th. And we are collaborating once again with our pals at WCET. And this one, since it's Open Education Resources Month, we are collaborating with them on accessibility considerations in open education. So you can find that at NWHeat.org, or you can go straight to this very long link I am sharing with you. Thank you again. This has been really great. Our first presentation on physical aspects of accessibility and some really great information. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.